April 7th, 1979. It's a story that by now we are very familiar with. The first Gundam anime launched, and unfortunately, became a commercial failure. Its runtime was cut short, and it seemed to be doomed to be forgotten, lost to the annals of time. But thanks to a combination of elements, Gundam was able to make one of the most miraculous comebacks ever, eventually cementing itself as one of the most popular and successful franchises in Japan. Despite its radical new way of telling a story for a mech anime, or perhaps thanks to it, a small but dedicated fan base had formed, and before long, they were ready for round 2. Enter Bandai. They became Gundam's main sponsor and decided to turn the mobile suits of the show into plastic model kits, or as it is often said in Japan, Gunpla, short for Gundam Plastic Model. And while these old Gunplas are worlds apart from our modern Gunplas, there are a surprising amount of elements that can actually be traced back all the way to the first line of kits. In July of 1980, we got the 1/144th scale and 1/100 scale RX-78-2 Gundam. And in December of that year, we also got the 1/60th scale Gundam. And while the grades assigned to these scales might have changed, the scales themselves haven't. And these kits also had some other things that we've come to expect as modern Gunpla builders. While the 1/144th scale Gundam was only molded in a single color, the 1/100 scale came in 2 colors. But this was nothing compared to the 3 colors of the 1/60th scale Char Zaku 2, which came out alongside that 1/60th scale RX-78-2. And these 3 colors made the Zaku completely presentable as a straight build. Only the Heat Hawk had to be painted, and the other weapons technically should have been a lighter shade of grey, but I would still label this as the first color-accurate Gunpla as we would expect it today. And together with the Gundam, these were also the first kits to use polycaps, something that would slowly become the standard for joints in the 80s and would continue to be so until relatively recently. Plus, each of these kits also came with another first. The Gundam had the first clear beam saber blades, and the mono eye of Char Zaku could be outfitted with a separately sold light bulb, making it the first light-up Gunpla. And with quality like this, it shouldn't be much of a surprise that Gundam took off, and that Gunpla has been a staple ever since. But for the first series, Bandai wasn't just content to turn the mobile suits into model kits. They wanted everything to be turned into a model kit. Mobile armors were turned into 1/550th scale kits, ships into 1/1200 or 1/2400 scale kits, characters into 1/20th scale kits, and dioramas into 1/250th scale kits. Back to the mobile suits then, they also came in 1/72nd scale mechanical models. First launched in November of 1981, these kits had an inner frame, and they even had part separation so that you could build them with the inner frame exposed. And to make them just that little bit extra impressive, they could also be fitted with light bulbs. And for another touch of realism, in 1982, Bandai came out with the real types, recolors of several of their 1/100 scale kits, but now with a more serious color scheme and a set of waterslide decals to make him feel even more like actual military things. In July of 1983 then, Bandai decided to go one step further with their multicolored Gunpla. Instead of having just one color per runner, Bandai used multi-injection molding to include multiple colors on one runner. And the result was a shockingly accurate model kit for a shockingly small price. The original 1/144th scale RX-78-2 went for 300 yen and was a white brick, whereas this one 250th scale RX-78-2 goes for 200 yen and is almost completely color accurate. The line was appropriately called Pla, with Iro being Japanese for color and Pla being short for plastic model kit, and, well, these were definitely some very colorful model kits for back in the day. Unfortunately though, it would still be a couple of years before this Pla technology would become the norm for Gunpla. Because when Zeta Gundam rolled around, Bandai mostly stuck to their standard 1/144th scale, 1/100th scale, and 1/60th scale model kits. But that is not to say that the Gunpla didn't have anything worth mentioning. For starters, they had their own set of non-standard scales. There was one 220th scale for the bigger mobile suits and also the elite machines, so that they were available in the same scale. There was also one 300 scale for the massive Psycho Gundams, and then one 2200 scale for the Argama, which I always thought was a bit of an odd choice because it's just a tad larger than the one 2400 scale of the original Gundam, but then still significantly smaller than the one 1200 scale. But anyways, the Zeta Gundam kits also had some first. Because it was the first anime to feature transformable mobile suits, it was also the first model kit line to feature transformable mobile suits. The 1/144th scale Zeta Gundam couldn't transform, but the 1/100 scale could do a full transformation. And it is actually a pretty complex one for being such an old model kit. And the same honor goes to the 1/144th scale Gapland, which was released in the same month. My favorite cheap way of giving us a transformed mobile suit though has to be the 1/220th scale Oshimar though. Instead of trying to make the mobile suit transform, which I mean would have been impossible for this small a scale, they just gave us a small non-scale mobile armor as a bonus. The next first then was movable hands. This was first introduced with the 1/100 scale Gundam Mark II and would continue to be used for the other 1/100 scales as well. And what I find crazy is that this isn't like the old school moving hands that you might be familiar with from the old 1/100 scale G, Wing, or X kits. Instead of having just the index finger separate and then the middle, ring, and pinky finger as a block of 3, these 4 fingers are all articulated separately. And in the case of the Hyzak, even the thumb is articulated. The third first then is a bit different. In December of 1985, we got the first Mobile Suit Girl plastic model kits. But unlike their mobile suit counterparts, these kits were actually a very far cry from the Mecha Mizume kits that we all know and love today. For starters, they have 0 articulation and are molded in a single color. What they did have was some compatibility with the Gunpla. Because they were 1/12th scale, they were roughly the same size as a 1/144th scale mobile suit. And they even show off this compatibility on the box. On the box of the Zeta Gundam Lady, we can see her with the Mark II's bazooka, which was included with the 1/144th scale Zeta Gundam weapon set. And talking about the weapon sets, this was an interesting thing that Bandai did at the time to keep the costs of their 1/144th scale models down. With both the original Gundam and Zeta Gundam, they really only included the bare minimum of accessories. For example, a beam rifle for the Gundams or a machine gun for the Zakus, and then sold the other weapons together in a set. A concept that we sometimes still see today, like with the Leo full weapon set, the expansion part set for the Demi Trainer, or even the Gunpla option part sets. And what also began around this time is something that I guess you could call a precursor to Premium Bandai. Along with their model kits, Bandai also published various magazines. So let's rewind time a little bit. In 1979, Bandai published the first issue of Mokei Jouhou, which translates to Model Kit Information, and had the English subtitle of Monthly Bandai Making Journal. As the name indicates, the magazine would consist mainly of information on Bandai's model kits, and by extension, also the shows that they were from. And because it was published by Bandai themselves, they were also the ones who could publish the juicy details about upcoming shows and model kits first. And what they also did was mail order. Now, it is difficult to find a lot of information on an old Japanese magazine, but I do know of at least 3 resin Gundam kits that were available through this magazine. The Dom Girl, the Zaku Girl, and the Goof Girl. All of which you can find out more about in my video on the history of Mecha Mizume. But Bandai didn't just stick with one magazine. At the end of 1985, they began publishing B Club. And unlike what I always assumed, the B doesn't just stand for Bandai, it stands for Bandai Brain Bank Media. Whatever that's supposed to mean. What was in the magazine then was a variety of things. They covered news for anime, drama, and tokusatsu, they serialized manga, they featured model kits, and the most important thing for this video, they also released resin kits. A lot of resin kits. In fact, I'm sure that a lot of you watching right now know about the B Club model kits, but not about the B Club magazine. Which I was also one of. But the magazine came first, and then the Gundam resin kits. And they really made a wide variety, from complete kits to conversion kits to small upgrade sets to even nude figures of former Asame and Sailor Mass. And yes, you heard that correctly. Bandai made official nude figures of former Asame and Sailor Mass. And if you think that I'm making this up, the proof is on screen. Censored, of course. And from what I understand, many of these B Club kits were either mail order or released in rather limited quantities, which is why I called them somewhat of a precursor to Premium Bandai. Back to our regular Gunpla then. When coming from the OG Gundam and Zeta Gundam, it is very striking how downsized the double Zeta Gundam line was. We don't have any 1/60th scales and only one 100 scale. And for the rest, a lot of 1/144 scales. And unfortunately, this trend would continue for a few years. So for the master grade fans in the audience, Bandai does have a history of trying to phase out the 1/100 scales. But just as they did now, they did replace it with something. In May of 1987, the world was graced with the first super deformed kit, the BB Senshi Gundaman. Because for some reason, the earliest releases got funky names based on their actual name in like an attempt to humanify them. And because these were meant for kids, they also came with a spring-loaded BB gun and a target to shoot at. And later sets would come with guns that shot all kinds of different projectiles, like my J-gun here. Its giant beam rifle can fire a rocket, a grenade, or a fist. 1 year later then, we would get another interesting new line, the 1/144 scale full color models. Although the new here does come with a bit of an asterisk. The kits that were part of this line were actually just reprints of 7 kits from the original Gundam series, but now painted. So the full color in the name doesn't refer to any fancy molding techniques, they just painted the runners. And to show off this new paint job, the initial release featured a box with a clear window. Then in 1989, they got a reprint with a new box to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the original Gundam series. And this box also came with a serial number, so you could see which number you had. I really wonder how much a single or even a double-digit one would go for nowadays. if they even still exist, that is. But now it's time to have a look at one of the biggest evolutions in Gunpla ever. In July of 1987, the first model kit of the new Sentinel line launched, the 1/144th scale full armor double Zeta Gundam. But this isn't a particularly impressive model kit. It is a remold of the 1/144th scale double Zeta Gundam with some new parts to turn it into the full armor version from Sentinel. But then 1 year later, in September, we get the 1/144th scale Zeta Plus C1, the first kit that I and many others consider to be the first modern Gunpla. Because here we finally get the final feature that we all enjoy today: Snap Fit. Because what I didn't mention up until now, but I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, is that up to this point, Gunpla required glue to be built, just like any other model kit. But this all changes now. You still need some glue for some parts, but for the vast majority, this kit clicks together. And it's not just that. When comparing it to older Gunpla, especially older 1/144th scale kits, the design just feels distinctly more modern, and its articulation is also miles ahead. Plus, it manages to pull off the Wave Rider mode with an almost complete transformation, not a parts formation. And on top of that, it also comes with marking stickers. Like, it is hard to imagine how mind-blowing this kit must have been at the time. And in the same month, we also got the third model of the Sentinel line, the S Gundam. While not as crazy innovative as the Zeta Plus C1, this would be the amalgamation of all previous technologies to lay the blueprint of what a future Gunpla would be. It was now completely snap fit, Aero Plus / system injection molding was back, and it had clear beam sabers. All things that would become common from here on out. But it seems that Bandai didn't yet have full confidence in their snap fit technology, because in their next line of model kits, being the Char's Counterattack line, screws would be included to make sure that the parts stayed together. And in the 1/100 scale new Gundam, we would get even more metal, because it had die-cast parts for the hip joints and the lower legs. It's a metal build. But believe it or not, this wasn't actually the most surprising thing about this model kit. Now, we all know that only Bandai can make Gundam model kits, because they own the license, minus Gundam Sentinel and Advance of Zeta. And therefore, every Gundam model kit that isn't made by Bandai isn't official. Right? No. Wave managed to strike a deal with Bandai and was allowed to make a 1/100 scale garage kit of the Sazabi. The box art of the two even lines up, like how cool is that? Fortunately, in the 0080 line, which was released through 1989, the screws would be gone again, and we get our first Gunpla line that feels completely modern. Relatively speaking, of course. And in the same year, Bandai would begin experimenting with another cool feature that would eventually lead to the real greats, a pre-assembled inner frame called the Movable System, or MS for short. Get it? Anyways, the line that this first appeared in was the Musha line in October of 1989. And anyone who's built one of the earlier real grades, or even some of the master grades, should be immediately familiar with this runner. It is of course rather limited, but it was crazy for the time. And if Gunpla managed to evolve this much during the 80s, I cannot wait to see what the 90s have in store for us. And if you have any experience with the 80s Gunpla, let me know down below what you thought about them. because I can imagine some very different experiences. Maybe you accidentally bought an old 80s kit expecting it to be more like a modern kit, or maybe you were like me and you actually wanted to get one of these old kits to like add it to your collection, or because it was the only thing available at the time. Like, I still remember when the old 1/144 scale J-Gun was the only way to get a J-Gun kit, minus the SDs. So obviously, I just had to get it. And despite how archaic it was, I did love the little thing. Although not as much as my HCM Pro J-Gun. Also, I want to give a big shout out to Dalong.net, because without that website and its extensive amount of Gunpla reviews, making this video would have been significantly harder. So if after this video you want to learn more about old Gunpla, I suggest you head over there and be amazed with what people in the 80s had to deal with. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time in the 90s.